The night in Manhattan was unusually quiet, the city's usual hum reduced to distant sirens and the occasional honk of a taxi. Benjamin Hard walked along the empty streets, his coat collar turned up against the chill, eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of light. The call had come just hours ago, another disappearance. A young programmer, vanished without a trace. No ransom, no message, no sign of struggle. Just gone. Benjamin reached the apartment building where the victim had last been seen. The lobby was empty, eerily so. He observed the security cameras, the mail slots, the elevator panel, the slightest scratches on the floor. His mind catalogued every detail, every minor irregularity. Nothing screamed, crime scene, in the traditional sense. Yet he knew better. Stepping into the apartment, he noted the meticulous organization of the space. The programmer's life seemed ordinary at first glance, a laptop, a small bookshelf, a kitchen untouched. Yet the subtle hints of daily life, an unwashed coffee mug, a backpack by the door, a jacket left hanging, told Benjamin that this wasn't a sudden flight. Someone had taken the young man deliberately, swiftly, and with calculated precision. He sat at the edge of the bed, tracing the patterns of the room with his eyes. The computer was still on, the code half-written, paused mid-thought. Files scattered on the desktop suggested no intention to leave, no plan to disappear. Benjamin's analytical mind raced, the abductors must have studied the victim. Every routine, every habit, every predictable moment could have been observed and exploited. Stepping back, he examined the windows. Each latch secure, no signs of forced entry. The doors were locked from the inside, a paradox that twisted his mind into puzzles. The city outside offered no witnesses, no hint of movement in the nearby streets. The disappearance had been surgical. Benjamin crouched to examine the floor near the desk. Tiny scuff marks, nearly imperceptible, led to the apartment door. He followed them in his mind, reconstructing the moment of abduction, a brief struggle, almost imperceptible, the victim moved out of sight within seconds. Someone had acted with speed and planning, yet left no trace that could immediately identify them. He pulled out his phone, contacting the NYPD liaison. "I need every detail on recent disappearances," he said, voice calm but commanding. "No matter how small or seemingly unrelated. Patterns are hidden in the mundane." Minutes stretched into an hour as Benjamin pored over the data he received, another disappearance in Soho, one near the East River, another uptown. None connected by witnesses, motive, or opportunity, except one. Each victim shared fleeting moments of solitude, times when no one would see them, places that seemed ordinary yet were utterly predictable. Benjamin leaned against the wall, letting his eyes sweep the apartment one more time. His instincts sharpened. The city's usual chaos was masking a hunter who moved without leaving a trace, blending into normal life. Whoever was behind this was meticulous, patient, and eerily intelligent. As he stepped back into the streets, the city lights casting long shadows across wet pavement, Benjamin realized the magnitude of what he faced. This was no ordinary case. The abductor wasn't seeking ransom, fame, or revenge. He was choosing his moments carefully, his victims even more so. Each disappearance was deliberate, precise, and terrifyingly quiet. Benjamin Hard adjusted his coat, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The hunt had begun, and the city, unaware, slept while a predator moved unseen through its streets. Somewhere in Manhattan, another life was at stake, and Benjamin knew that every decision he made now could be the difference between life and death. The night had just begun, but the game had already started. Benjamin Hard moved through the early morning streets of Manhattan, the city still cloaked in shadows and quiet mist. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement, casting fractured glimmers across his path. He replayed the details of the vanished programmer in his mind, the locked apartment, the untouched belongings, the invisible trail. There was something familiar about this method, a pattern in the chaos that others couldn't see. He entered the precinct, nodding at the officers he passed. The NYPD had been cooperative but frustrated, multiple disappearances with no witnesses, no forced entry, no ransom demands. Benjamin knew the conventional methods would fail here. He needed to look deeper, beyond the surface of the mundane. He spread out the files on his desk, each representing a victim, ages, professions, neighborhoods, daily routines. At first, nothing connected them: a programmer, a student, a barista, a freelance photographer. But Benjamin's trained mind began to notice subtler consistencies. Each had been alone during a brief window of time, each had been at a predictable location in the city, a specific coffee shop, a particular train line, or a quiet street corner. The choices were deliberate. Benjamin jotted notes, connecting dots others wouldn't see. The pattern wasn't random, it was an invisible thread woven through ordinary life. The abductor was exploiting routines, the small habits people considered irrelevant. The more predictable the person, the more vulnerable they became. He considered the psychology of the perpetrator. This wasn't a man acting out of anger or financial desperation. This was someone who studied his targets, calculated risks, and moved with surgical precision. The disappearances were almost artistic, each victim removed with minimal disruption, leaving behind a sense of eerie normalcy. It was methodical, cold, and chilling. Benjamin's phone buzzed, a message from a contact who tracked missing persons online. Another one. West Village. Late night. Similar circumstances. He studied the report: a young graphic designer had vanished. Apartment secure, no forced entry, family unaware until morning. The same invisible pattern. He left the precinct, moving toward the West Village. Every corner, every alley, every dimly lit street was a potential trap or clue. Benjamin's eyes swept for subtle signs: scuff marks, displaced objects, a door slightly ajar. Even now, nothing was obvious. The city breathed normally, oblivious to the predator among them. Arriving near the scene, Benjamin observed the building quietly. He noted the routines of neighbors, the times when lights switched on or off, the rhythm of passers-by. He began reconstructing the moment of disappearance in his mind, imagining the window of opportunity the abductor had chosen. Later, speaking with the victim's friends and family, Benjamin listened carefully. Every anecdote mattered: the barista who remembered seeing the victim leave with a slight delay, the roommate who noticed unusual shadows near the door, a passerby who remembered a fleeting figure across the street. Each fragment was like a thread in a complex tapestry. By nightfall, Benjamin had mapped a rough pattern across the city. The disappearances weren't random, they were moments in time and space, exploiting predictability and human routine. He had yet to find the perpetrator, but he understood the logic: the abductor moved silently, selecting the right moment, the right person, and striking with untraceable precision. Benjamin paused on a bridge overlooking the East River. The water flowed quietly below, reflecting the city's lights like shards of glass. Somewhere across Manhattan, another life hung in the balance. He clenched his fists, feeling the familiar tension of anticipation. This was no ordinary case. The hunter and the hunted were engaged in a silent dance, and Benjamin Hard had only begun to learn the rhythm. The night deepened. Manhattan streets were alive with stories, but only one story was being written in silence, and Benjamin was determined to read it before the next victim disappeared. Benjamin Hard spent the early hours of the morning retracing the routines of the missing victims. Every coffee shop, subway entrance, and street corner became a clue in his mental map of the city. Manhattan's chaos, the countless people moving in and out of sight, created a perfect cover for someone who knew exactly when and where to strike. He returned to the programmer's apartment once more, examining the layout, the angles of the windows, the proximity to the fire escape. He reconstructed the timeline of that night in his mind, calculating how long it would take someone to enter unnoticed, remove the victim, and vanish into the city's endless network of streets. There was no rush, no hesitation, only a meticulous plan executed flawlessly. Benjamin visited the families of the victims, asking careful questions. When was the last time you saw them? Did they deviate from their routine in any way? Each answer, no matter how small, contributed to the invisible puzzle. One family mentioned a late-night walk, another, a routine stop at a convenience store, another, an unusual detour to meet a friend. The pattern emerged: the abductor exploited those rare deviations, using the city's unpredictability to strike at the most predictable moments. He analyzed surveillance footage from the surrounding streets, not for the act itself, there was nothing to see, but for anomalies in the environment. A shadow lingering too long, a figure walking against the flow of people, a van parked where it shouldn't be. Even these fragments were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet Benjamin could trace their significance. By midday, Benjamin began connecting the victims in ways that no one else had noticed. They were ordinary people, yet their lives shared invisible threads, habits, routes, timings. The abductor was not random, he studied, observed, and chose with an almost ritualistic precision. It was a quiet, predatory logic that left the world none the wiser. Benjamin walked the streets like a ghost, watching, listening, calculating. He noted the way streetlights flickered, how the subway doors opened and closed, how delivery trucks blocked sightlines at specific times. Every detail mattered. He imagined the perpetrator moving through the same city, predicting the flow of ordinary lives, exploiting moments when vulnerability coincided with opportunity. That night, Benjamin returned to the West Village, retracing the route of the latest victim. He noticed something: a sequence of slight misalignments in the environment, a knocked-over trash can, a door ajar, a bicycle moved from its usual spot. Each small detail suggested a movement, a presence, a moment in time where something had occurred. None of it was obvious, none of it would attract the attention of casual observers. Yet Benjamin understood. He sketched a rough map on his notepad, lines connecting locations, times, and small environmental cues. It wasn't a map of streets, but a map of behavior, the invisible patterns that led to the abductor's choice of victim and timing. For the first time, Benjamin felt a glimmer of insight into the mind behind the disappearances. The city slept, unaware of the predator weaving through its streets. Benjamin paused on a quiet corner, looking up at the apartment windows, imagining how the abductor had chosen his targets. The logic was simple, cruel, and effective: exploit the predictable, strike when unseen, leave no trace. Benjamin's mind raced. He had no suspect, no motive, no clue to a name. Yet he had something more vital: understanding. And in understanding, he found the first real advantage over a criminal who believed himself invisible. The hunt had begun in earnest. Manhattan was full of shadows, but Benjamin Hard had started to see the lines connecting them. And somewhere in those shadows, the next disappearance was waiting. Benjamin Hard moved through the quiet apartments of Manhattan, one by one, listening to stories that seemed ordinary at first. Friends, family, colleagues, each person offered fragments of memory, a laugh, a habit, a late-night routine. At first glance, none of it appeared relevant. But Benjamin knew better. Ordinary details often hid extraordinary truths. He met with the roommate of the recently vanished graphic designer in West Village. "She left around 11, the roommate said. "Just like every night. I didn't notice anything unusual, except she stopped by the small cafe across the street. She liked that place." Benjamin listened intently, noting the precision in her routines. That small cafe, that late-night walk, became a point of interest. The abductor had chosen the moment when predictability and vulnerability intersected. Next, he spoke to a young journalist whose neighbor had disappeared weeks earlier. He was meticulous, always checking his email, carrying a notebook. Nothing seemed out of place. Benjamin's eyes narrowed. These victims shared more than habits, they were careful people, yet their carefulness had been exploited. The abductor wasn't random, he preyed on patterns, exploiting predictability, calculating every tiny action. Benjamin returned to his loft later, tracing timelines across a map of Manhattan. Subway schedules, delivery routes, nightlife patterns, every variable added to the invisible web the abductor moved within. He began seeing connections others could not: how victim schedules intersected, where they were alone, and at which moments the city's rhythm provided perfect cover for the predator. At night, Benjamin walked the streets again, retracing the steps of each missing person. He observed the city as if it were alive, a web of behavior and motion. Streetlights flickered, shadows shifted, and the mundane routines of New Yorkers, a man walking his dog, a woman returning from a late shift, became markers in a map only Benjamin could read. The predator was patient, waiting for opportunities that the world never noticed, for moments that seemed insignificant but were perfect for his crimes. He revisited the apartment of the student who had vanished uptown. Nothing had changed, yet Benjamin's trained eyes found subtle inconsistencies: a window slightly open, a discarded jacket not in its usual place, the faint smell of perfume lingering longer than expected. Each anomaly was a thread in a hidden tapestry, one that could lead him closer to understanding the abductor's method. Over cups of green tea, Benjamin reviewed his notes, connecting patterns between victims. He realized that the abductor was constructing a series of invisible equations, each disappearance calculated to exploit weakness, habit, and opportunity. The city was the canvas, the victims were variables, and the abductor was a master of silent manipulation. He called his NYPD contact. "I need access to every missing person report in the last 6 months," he said. "I'm not looking for forced entries or fingerprints. I'm looking for patterns in behavior, in timing, in movement." The detective on the other end paused, impressed by the methodical approach. "You really think someone's following routines that closely?" Benjamin's voice was calm. "I don't think, I know. And they're patient enough to wait for the perfect moment." Later, standing on a deserted corner, Benjamin felt the weight of the city pressing around him. Each flicker of light, each quiet street, each solitary figure could be part of the next disappearance. Manhattan was alive with hidden movements, and somewhere, the abductor was watching, calculating, waiting. Benjamin Hart adjusted the collar of his coat, eyes scanning the shadows. The lives of ordinary people hung in the balance, unnoticed, and he had to see what the rest of the world couldn't. The invisible thread linking the victims was faint, but it was there, and he intended to follow it to its source. The city slept. Benjamin did not. The city seemed alive with hidden movements, each alleyway and side street a stage for events that only Benjamin Hart could begin to interpret. He moved through lower Manhattan with deliberate steps, senses alert, observing patterns invisible to most. Delivery trucks blocked sightlines, pedestrians followed predictable paths, streetlights flickered, all forming a rhythm the abductor relied upon. Benjamin had to learn that rhythm. His first stop was a narrow street near the East River, where a young barista had disappeared 2 nights prior. The building was ordinary: brick walls, iron fire escape, windows glowing faintly with interior lights. Benjamin circled the block, noting each exit, each blind spot, each shadow that could conceal movement. The city offered no clear clues, yet he felt traces of presence, subtle hints in the environment, like a ripple in water. Benjamin crouched near a fire hydrant, scanning the pavement. Small scuff marks, faint enough to be ignored by anyone else, suggested a hurried movement, perhaps a struggle or a quick relocation. He traced them mentally, imagining the scene, reconstructing the sequence. The abductor had been meticulous, leaving nothing obvious, but the details of human behavior were never entirely erased. He stopped at a corner cafe that the missing barista frequented. Benjamin spoke with the night manager, who recalled seeing someone loitering across the street around closing time. "Tall, dark coat, didn't look out of place," the man said. Benjamin's mind catalogued the observation. The abductor blended seamlessly into the environment. He was patience itself, moving like a shadow in plain sight. From there, Benjamin wandered through narrow alleys, scanning rooftops, and observing side streets that connected to the apartment buildings where previous victims had vanished. Each neighborhood held subtle cues, patterns of human activity, variations in lighting, traffic, and sound that could be exploited. Benjamin mapped these variables mentally, building a framework for understanding the predator's choices. Hours passed. Benjamin retraced dozens of routes, noted the flow of taxis, delivery vans, and foot traffic. The abductor didn't make mistakes. Every moment of inattention, every minor deviation in routine, could have been observed and calculated against. Benjamin realized he was learning the predator's rhythm before even encountering him. As dusk fell, Benjamin reached a quieter area near the west side. He paused, surveying a narrow street lined with old warehouses. Here, the silence was almost unnatural, punctuated only by distant traffic. He imagined the abductor moving through the same streets, waiting for the right person at the right moment. The predator didn't need to leave evidence, he relied entirely on timing, opportunity, and the predictable patterns of life. Benjamin traced the steps of the last missing victim, a young student who often walked alone at night. Each streetlight, each doorway, each blind spot formed a web that the abductor had exploited. Benjamin mentally plotted every conceivable route, understanding how subtle changes in behavior could make someone vulnerable. He had no direct evidence, no suspect, no name, only the invisible framework of choices and opportunity. Night deepened, and the city's shadows grew long. Benjamin adjusted his coat, eyes scanning every movement. Somewhere in Manhattan, the predator was out there, following a sequence of choices that only he understood. Another life was in danger, another disappearance inevitable if Benjamin failed to anticipate the next move. He exhaled slowly, the chill night air filling his lungs. Patience, observation, and relentless analysis were his weapons. The abductor was careful, precise, almost omniscient in his planning, but even the most meticulous predator left a trace in the patterns of his victims' lives. Benjamin Hard had begun to see that trace. The hunt had reached the streets. Benjamin Hard returned to his loft, the city's lights casting long reflections across the polished hardwood floors. He spread out his notes, maps, timelines, witness statements, and began to analyze the invisible logic behind the abductor's actions. This wasn't randomness. Each disappearance followed a carefully orchestrated rhythm, a method rooted in observation, timing, and human behavior. He closed his eyes, reconstructing the sequence of the previous victim's routines. Every small deviation, every moment of solitude had been exploited. The abductor didn't act impulsively. He calculated, predicted, and waited for the perfect moment. Benjamin's mind raced as he tried to anticipate the patterns, to think like the predator without losing his own perspective. He studied the profiles of the victims once more, young professionals, students, people with routines so ingrained they became predictable. The abductor was not interested in wealth, status, or fame, only opportunity. The selection criteria seemed personal, almost arbitrary, yet it followed a strict internal logic. Benjamin theorized, the predator chose people whose lives were structured, predictable, and thus manipulable. Hours passed as Benjamin cross-referenced the victim's habits. Every coffee shop visit, every commute, every late-night errand formed a web of potential vulnerability. He realized the abductor had spent weeks, maybe months, observing these patterns, learning the rhythm of each person's life. The thought sent a shiver down Benjamin's spine. He picked up a photograph of the programmer, the first victim. His blue eyes seemed ordinary, unaware of the danger that had stalked him. Benjamin considered the psychological profile of the abductor, patient, meticulous, and intelligent, a hunter who relied on observation, not violence, to control his environment. Violence came only when necessary, as a tool rather than a goal. Benjamin's phone buzzed. A text from the NYPD, another disappearance reported, this time a young artist near Chelsea. He noted the time and location, comparing it to the previous patterns. The abductor was consistent. There was a rhythm to the chaos. And Benjamin, by reconstructing it, might finally predict the next move. He left his loft, walking through the streets once more. Each step, each corner, each flicker of light was a variable in the equation. Benjamin observed the people around him, their habits, their pace, the subtle behaviors that could make them targets. He imagined the abductor watching from the shadows, calculating his moves, testing the environment for weaknesses. At a quiet intersection, Benjamin paused. He considered the predator's perspective, waiting, observing, calculating. The abductor was not reckless, He was deliberate, almost artistic in his execution. Benjamin realized that understanding this mindset was the key. If he could think like the hunter, anticipate the choices, he could intervene before another disappearance occurred. He sketched potential scenarios, predicting routes, times, and patterns. Each variable had a probability, each probability a consequence. The abductor's mind was a machine of observation, and Benjamin was learning to operate within it, matching calculation with intuition, anticipation with patience. Night fell, and the city seemed to hold its breath. Benjamin Hart adjusted his coat, eyes scanning the quiet streets. Somewhere, the abductor moved unseen, patient, calculating, waiting for the next opportunity. Benjamin had no suspect, no direct evidence, no name, but he had insight, and insight could be as deadly as any weapon. The hunt had entered a new phase. Understanding the mind of the hunter was the only way to save the next victim. Manhattan slept, oblivious. Benjamin did not. Benjamin Hart moved through Manhattan with the precision of a hunter himself, every step calculated, every observation catalogued. The city at night was alive with movement, yet he walked unseen, unnoticed, blending into the rhythm of the streets. Somewhere among the countless faces and fleeting shadows, the abductor was out there, selecting the next moment to strike. He began retracing the routes of the latest victims, plotting the intersections, subway stations, and quiet streets where the abductor could have struck. Benjamin's mind worked like a machine, calculating probabilities and reconstructing timelines. Each variable, a delayed bus, a pedestrian crossing, a streetlight flicker, could shift the opportunity for the predator. The east side was quiet, the hum of distant traffic masking the pulse of the city. Benjamin observed the patterns of people leaving late-night jobs, walking alone, their attention absorbed in phones and earbuds. He imagined the abductor watching from a nearby shadow, calculating which life was predictable enough to exploit next. At a small coffee shop near the missing artist's last known location, Benjamin interviewed the staff. "She came in around 10, like always," one barista said. "Ordered the same latte. Sat by the window." Benjamin noted the details, filing them into the mental map of patterns he was building. The abductor relied on predictability, and Benjamin was beginning to see it emerge like a ghost from the shadows. He walked along the side streets, scanning rooftops and fire escapes, imagining possible routes the abductor could have taken. He visualized the moments of isolation, the brief windows of opportunity that the predator exploited. Manhattan was a labyrinth, but Benjamin had started to understand the invisible threads that connected each disappearance. Hours passed. Benjamin traced every alley, every staircase, every pedestrian path. He noticed something subtle, a set of discarded items, a small bag, slightly out of place, near a quiet street corner. On instinct, he crouched, examining them. They weren't evidence in the traditional sense, but they suggested a fleeting presence, a path recently traveled. It was the first tangible thread he had encountered, faint but real. Following the trace, Benjamin moved silently, calculating distances and timing. The city's noise masked everything except the sound of his own steps. He imagined the abductor's thought process, waiting for the right moment, observing, calculating. It was a patient, meticulous strategy that left no room for error. By midnight, Benjamin had reconstructed the probable route the abductor had taken to reach the latest victim. It was a narrow path through side streets and hidden passages, one that allowed a quick disappearance without attracting attention. Benjamin felt the thrill of anticipation, the first real opportunity to confront the logic of the predator's movement. Standing on a deserted street, Benjamin paused, eyes scanning the surroundings. The abductor had vanished into the shadows, but the pattern was emerging. He could anticipate, predict, and perhaps intercept. Manhattan was a maze, and Benjamin was beginning to understand the invisible map drawn by the abductor's choices. The night was deep, the air cold, and the city's usual pulse felt different, sharper, more deliberate. Benjamin adjusted his coat, his senses heightened. Somewhere ahead, in the intricate weave of streets and alleys, the abductor moved. The hunt was no longer theoretical, it was tangible, immediate. Benjamin Hard had found the first real thread. The chase had begun. Benjamin Hard moved cautiously through the quiet streets of Chelsea, every sense alert. The city's usual hum was subdued, leaving only distant traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. Tonight, Benjamin knew, the hunt was no longer abstract. He was following a tangible thread, the first real sign of the abductor's recent movement. The alleyways were narrow and shadowed, walls close, punctuated by fire escapes and graffiti-covered doors. Benjamin traced the path the latest victim had likely taken, imagining the abductor moving silently, observing, calculating. Each step was deliberate, each sound potentially masking the predator's presence. He paused near an old warehouse, its windows dark and opaque. It had no obvious connection to the city, yet it fit the pattern, isolated, accessible, overlooked. Benjamin crouched, eyes scanning the perimeter, analyzing possible entry points. He envisioned the abductor's methodical choices, the routes, the timing, the precision. Whoever it was, patience was their weapon. Benjamin's mind catalogued every detail, the uneven pavement, the placement of trash bins, the faint scent of smoke in the air. These were the cues the predator relied upon, small but critical variables in the orchestration of disappearances. He adjusted his approach, moving with calculated stealth, shadows blending with shadows. From the corner of his eye, Benjamin noticed a slight movement, a curtain shifting, a door ajar for a brief moment. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to signal presence. He advanced carefully, listening, watching, anticipating. Each sound, each flicker of light, was a potential indicator, a language the abductor spoke without words. He entered a narrow passageway that connected the warehouse to the street. The air was colder here, carrying faint echoes of distant traffic. Benjamin imagined the predator's thought process, timing, observation, control. The abductor was intelligent, patient, and always several steps ahead. But Benjamin had the advantage of analysis, intuition, and experience. Minutes stretched into an hour as Benjamin studied the environment, reconstructing possible movements. Every angle, every potential hiding spot, every exit was considered. He realized that the abductor had prepared for such observations, anticipating the city's law enforcement and casual witnesses. Yet Benjamin's understanding of patterns gave him a new edge. A faint sound, a footstep, deliberate but soft, caught his attention. Benjamin froze, listening. The city's quiet seemed amplified, each distant noise sharper, each shadow a potential threat. He moved slowly, aligning his path with the sound, every muscle taut, ready to respond. Finally, at the edge of a narrow corridor behind the warehouse, Benjamin saw movement, fleeting, almost imperceptible. He crouched behind a stack of crates, analyzing the situation. The abductor was near. For the first time, Benjamin felt the tension of proximity. The predator was no longer a distant figure in the city, but a presence that could be confronted, a mind to match his own. Benjamin's hand brushed against his coat pocket, fingers resting on his phone. He had no backup, no immediate help, only his observation skills, intuition, and patience. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and another life could be lost. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. Manhattan's quiet streets had become a stage for a deadly game of anticipation, intellect, and precision. Benjamin Hard had entered the narrow edge, the point where calculation met danger. The hunter and the hunted were about to converge. The air in the narrow corridor behind the warehouse was thick with tension. Benjamin Hard moved cautiously, every nerve alert. The faint echo of his own footsteps mingled with distant city sounds, creating a rhythm that was almost deceptive. Somewhere ahead, the abductor was close. Benjamin could feel it, a presence that was patient, deliberate, and calculating. He crouched behind a stack of crates, analyzing the shadows. His mind raced, reconstructing possible escape routes, estimating the predator's options, and predicting reactions. This was no ordinary criminal. Whoever had orchestrated the disappearances was intelligent, methodical, and had thought several steps ahead. But Benjamin had something the abductor did not: foresight built on observation, psychology, and intuition. A faint shift in the shadows caught his eye. Benjamin froze, holding his breath. A figure moved deliberately, scanning the environment as if anticipating someone's presence. The predator's meticulous patience was evident in every movement. Benjamin's pulse quickened, but his voice remained calm in his mind. Every decision now mattered. He edged forward, careful to remain in cover, analyzing body language, posture, and the subtle cues that indicated intent. The abductor had chosen his ground wisely: narrow passages, obscure angles, and escape routes that could be exploited. But Benjamin had studied the patterns, the timing, and the behavior of previous victims. He was ready to anticipate the next move. Suddenly, the predator made a slight misstep, a foot shifted too heavily, a shadow lingered too long. Benjamin's eyes narrowed. That small error was all he needed. He moved swiftly, silent, closing the distance while remaining undetected. Every instinct, every calculated move, converged in that instant. The abductor turned, realization flashing across his face for the briefest moment. Benjamin lunged, grabbing the arm of the figure and pinning it against the cold brick wall. The struggle was tense but brief. The predator was strong, but Benjamin's precision and anticipation gave him the advantage. "You underestimated the patterns," Benjamin said, his voice low, controlled. "You studied the victims, but you didn't account for me." The figure struggled, eyes wide, revealing the intelligence and cold calculation beneath. "You don't understand," the abductor hissed. "I only chose those who deserved it. I saved them from a world they couldn't survive." Benjamin's grip tightened slightly. "You call this salvation, but it's abduction. Lives lost, families terrified. You played judge, jury, and executioner. That stops now." The abductor froze for a heartbeat, then tried to push Benjamin back. Benjamin anticipated the movement, shifting his weight, using leverage, and bringing the figure down to the ground. The struggle ended with the abductor restrained, breathing heavily, his plan finally interrupted. Benjamin stood over the subdued figure, surveying the warehouse and surrounding streets. The predator's carefully constructed game was over. The invisible patterns, the calculated strikes, the meticulously timed disappearances, all halted. Manhattan's quiet streets could finally begin to breathe again. He radioed the NYPD liaison. "I've got him. Keep the area secure. We have the suspect in custody." As sirens approached, Benjamin stepped outside into the night air. The city lights reflected off wet streets, the pulse of Manhattan returning to normal. Somewhere in the shadows, the fear that had gripped the city was fading. The victims' lives, once hanging by a thread, could now begin to heal. Benjamin Hart adjusted his coat, eyes scanning the streets. The predator was caught, but the city's rhythm continued, the patterns of life, the predictable routines, the hidden moments of vulnerability. Manhattan never truly slept, and Benjamin knew there would always be another puzzle, another invisible thread to follow. Tonight, though, the city was safe. The hunt was over, for now. Benjamin Hart watched as the NYPD led the abductor away, the suspect's hands cuffed, his face a mixture of defiance and resignation. The warehouse behind him was silent now, stripped of the tension that had thickened the air for nights. Manhattan streets, though still alive with movement, seemed to exhale collectively. The nightmare was over. Yet Benjamin knew better than anyone, understanding the mind behind the crimes was just as important as capturing the person. He studied the abductor's face, noting the flickers of emotion, pride, calculation, and a strange sense of righteousness. This was not a mind driven by malice alone, but by a twisted logic, an internal code that justified actions in a way only the perpetrator could comprehend. He reviewed the pattern of disappearances one last time: young professionals, students, people whose lives were structured and predictable. Each was chosen meticulously, every routine studied, every vulnerability noted. The abductor's motive was not financial gain, not revenge, but control, a warped sense of order imposed on the chaos of the city. Benjamin walked through the warehouse again, his eyes sweeping the corners, the shadows, the silent spaces where plans had been conceived. "You thought you were invisible," he said quietly, speaking to the empty room, "but even the most calculated patterns leave traces in the behavior of others." He contacted the families of the victims, assuring them their loved ones were safe and explaining what had happened. Relief washed over the survivors, but Benjamin could see the lingering fear in their eyes, a reminder of the invisible threads that had once bound them to danger. Back in his loft, Benjamin reflected on the case. The abductor had been patient, intelligent, and meticulous, but he had underestimated the power of observation, intuition, and relentless analysis. Patterns could be invisible to most, but not to Benjamin. Understanding human behavior, predicting actions, and reading the subtle cues of the city had led him here. The abductor's motives were complex, bordering on philosophical in their perverse logic. He believed himself a guardian, a chooser of fate, yet his actions were abductions, terror, and crime. Benjamin understood this mind, yet could not condone it. Justice was not only about apprehending criminals but comprehending the reasoning behind their choices, to prevent repetition, to anticipate future threats. Manhattan's lights flickered below Benjamin's loft window. The city's rhythm, once punctuated by fear and uncertainty, now returned to its natural pulse. The invisible patterns had been disrupted, and the abductor's control dismantled. Benjamin sipped his green tea, the warmth grounding him after nights of relentless focus. Yet he knew the city would never be entirely safe. Human behavior created opportunities, and there would always be those who saw patterns where others did not. But for now, tonight, the predator was caught, the victim safe, and the invisible thread severed. Benjamin Hard leaned back, letting the silence of the city wash over him. Manhattan slept, oblivious to the danger that had lurked among its shadows. But Benjamin remained vigilant, ready for the next pattern, the next disappearance, the next invisible thread that might need unraveling. In the heart of the city, in the rhythm of its streets and the pulse of its people, Benjamin Hard remained the unseen guardian, observing, calculating, and prepared for whatever darkness would emerge next. The case was closed. But the hunt, in some form, would never end.